Hey folks, am I
Ah,
audible?
hi.
Finally,
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
I can. Can you see me and hear me?
Yeah, I can. I can. Hey, Rahul. Welcome.
Hey, finally. I mean,
Finally.
it's been a task.
Yes. So, Rahul, I was telling people why I chose this topic. I mean, I'm sure even you face this whenever patients come to our OPDs with any substance addiction or dependence. Family members usually look at it as a moral problem or ethical problem or a personality defect or a character flaw rather than a disease.
Absolutely.
Right? So I thought people should understand more
Absolutely.
than the people who are dependent. The family members and friends should know what addiction is, so they can,
I
you know,
agree.
yeah. So Rahul,
I
introduce
think that's
yourself.
spot on.
Yeah,
Yes. So I
introduce yourself. What
am,
do you do?
yeah. So I am Dr. Rahul Khemani. I am a consultant psychiatrist, been practicing in Mumbai since the last more than 4 years now. I have done my psychiatry in Tamil Nadu, in fact, because I loved traveling and I wanted to explore the South, in fact. So I am quite close to you, in fact, in this sense. And also, I have been now actively in this lockdown period trying to spread awareness through my page, This Psychiatrist Speaks, and successfully I've been doing a lot of webinars. And this was one more thing that I was more than happy when Charan, told me that let's do something on addiction. And I was like, yeah, like I think this is spot on right now because especially after the lockdown opened up, there were a lot of people who started getting back into all these substances. So I think this is where we can maybe, tackle the problem at the root level itself.
True, true. So where do you work in Mumbai?
I am located in Borivali in Mumbai. I have my own clinic, Heart and Mind Clinic. Along with my elder brother, I have my practice there. Along with that, I've been visiting multiple hospitals there, going for multiple referrals, and as well as visiting in and around that area in Kandivali, Malad, Bhayandar, Mira Road. These are quite popular suburban areas of Mumbai, and I stay there, so it's the place where I work there too.
Right, right. Fantastic. So if people want to reach out for you, they can find you. It's not that difficult to find
Yes,
you.
yes. In fact, on this Insta page itself, I have kept my contact number easily available, in including my email ID. So quite a lot of people, in fact, do just click on that contact and directly call me up, and I'm like a little confused sometimes. Oh, where did this person contact me from? But luckily, due to social media, I think this is one good thing that has happened now that people are finding it very easy to contact and find any mental health professional. I've seen your page itself, and you are quite popular among social media as well.
I'm not actually. Someone just asked
Right,
me
right.
question why I don't reply to their DMs. So I apologized them and
Oh,
said, I mean, we have full-time jobs and it's very difficult to keep up. You know what?
precisely.
Yeah.
I know, I know. We finish our OPDs late in the night, and then beyond that, when we sit down, it's quite conflicting to, sit down and just reply to these things when we have been attending to these things the entire day. So
Yeah.
I would urge people to directly call up the doctor rather than texting or DM, on social media, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Rahul, let's dive into the topic. I have a few questions for you. Uh, it's strange because we both are psychiatrists, we both know this topic, so we both are not learning much from each other, but we're educating people. So on that
Very
note,
nice.
Rahul,
Hmm.
yeah, what is addiction?
So, this is one common question that comes across, and people always confuse addiction with choice or willpower, which I say is the first myth that I would like to burst to begin with. I would want to start by saying that addiction is a proper disorder. Please, people, remember this line at the end of this session that whatever we are dealing with is a disorder in addiction. People think that it is just, if a person controls themselves, they can, control addiction. But this is a proper disorder that happens in the brain. It's related to those neurochemicals in the mind. What happens is that any substance, any drug of abuse, whether it is alcohol, nicotine, or marijuana, cannabis, or opioids, or other things like gambling, it could be internet, other things. Basically, what they do is they stimulate a particular pathway in the brain called as the reward pathway. And as the name suggests, This reward pathway gives us pleasure. And because of this pleasure principle, we tend to want it more and more. What happens is whenever we consume a drug, whether it's by inhalation, whether it's by smoking, whether it's by injection, it immediately stimulates that pleasure in the brain. And that pleasure is associated with the memory and with a release of a particular neurochemical called as dopamine. Now, this dopamine is like petrol to the car. It's like when you used to play those video games and you used to have a nitro boost in those cars. So that's the nitro boost of the car. It makes you feel overtly high or excited, and that makes you want to do it more and more. So that is the reason why you continue doing it more and more. So this is the reason why a person can't, leave addiction. In fact, to just end this question, I would just add on by saying that I always tell the relatives of people who come to me with problems of addiction that imagine yourself holding your nose and mouth and not breathing. You'll be able to do that for a minute. You'll be able to do that for even 2 minutes in people who are good swimmers and all. But beyond that, you might start gasping for breath and you might be like literally wanting to do anything so that you could breathe. And for example, in that instance, if you had to literally steal air or you had to kill someone for that air, that is the way a person in addiction feels, that they literally feel like they're gasping for air. This is what I say is addiction in the most simplest words possible. Let me ask you, Charan, what do you think that when people have addiction, why can't they stop?
Yeah, I mean that is basically extension of what you just said. So I would like to repeat it again, so like people understand it again. Um, just like how you mentioned reward pathway. So our brain has memory. It has a reward network. It has the front of the brain deals with remembering things, also logical thinking. You know what is correct, what is not, and all these things. So naturally how we are built is whenever I'm eating good food or I'm listening to great music or good sex or whatever basic you know primitive stimuli that we all need, immediately my brain secretes this dopamine. So what happens? I get excited, I get very high, or thinking about the food or sex or watching a movie or meeting my one of my close friends gives me a high. You know, people call it high on life, right? So you get really excited. When you're drinking alcohol, what happens is this wiring in the brain changes little bit and little bit and little bit to an extent where the threshold for the pleasure stimuli is set so high that none of this will make you want to feel happy and high. So let's just say now I'm
Precise.
dependent to alcohol. Sex doesn't give me fun. Food, I don't really care. I don't really care about meeting people, enjoying good conversations, nothing. All I care about is procuring the drug or procuring the substance or doing that activity that I'm addicted to. It's beyond your control. It's like you saying you have COVID, why are you having fever in COVID? You know, it's a symptom of a disease. So there will be strong craving and they will go to any extent to procure the drug. Sometimes maybe even like abuse people around. That's what, you know, I'm sure you heard this too, Rahul. Patient family member says that
Yes,
when he's not drinking, he's a very nice person.
exactly. Because
Yeah,
it makes a complete change in your way of thinking, to be very honest.
right.
Because it affects the way you are as a person.
Yeah, yeah. So, so the any substance, these addictive substances, they change these two areas. One is the reward area, so you don't get pleasure on anything, so you only go back to the drug. Second is the area that deals with what is right, what is wrong. That is gone. So you don't know beyond a point. For example, let's just say now I want to like slap someone. Immediately, my friend of the brain tells me like, no, you can't do it. It's not right. You know, there will be consequences. My brain tells me that and I know it. Now, when I'm taking substance, that area is knocked off. So immediately, it doesn't tell me if it's right or wrong. So I will go ahead and do it. That's why a lot of people who are dependent on drugs, they're very impulsive in nature. Yeah. So it's not in their control, obviously, to not take the drug or the activity that they're addicted to. Right.
Very unfortunately. Yes.
Right. Um, what are the risk factors of addiction? I mean, I'm sure like some of us or most of us consume alcohol once in a while or, you know, like New Year's or birthday. How come all of us are getting addicted?
Precisely.
Only few of us are.
True. So I think this is one very interesting question that you put across, Charan. So what I would say is, to begin with, and the most common risk factor that people always love to discuss is genetics. Obviously, this is where people say that it is coming through family, it is coming through your genes throughout. We'll discuss that again more in detail. Other than the genetics, I say that the more important risk factors that I would like to discuss is that there is this environmental influence on you. So that is how we divide risk factors always, the genetics and the environment. The environment is interesting because it makes you think of how did this come to this point. Like when we see patients, when a person comes to me and knowing that this person is in addiction, this is the first thing I do as an evaluation. This is where my Sherlock Holmes brains works on, finding out why this is happening. So what happens is that begin with, the first influence that happens is your parental, on how much your parents have control over you. It can be bad in both the situations, whether it's excessive control or too less control. It needs to be exactly adequate. So when there is less control, you don't know where your child is, what your child is doing. Automatically, what happens is that they go out and probably try their drugs for the first time and they enjoy it and they're like, fine, nobody is, looking up to me, nobody cares what I'm doing, so let's do it more and more. The second thing, when they're too much under control for parents, it's kind of an adventure for them that, yeah, let's explore this because my parents do not want me to do it. It has to be something that I should try doing it. So that is where the second part comes. Now we can't put all the things on parents, obviously. So let's come to the friends. And obviously, friends play the biggest role in your life, which I think everyone agrees, including introvert people who are listening. Don't ask me this question that I have only two friends. Those two friends are also enough for you to get into addiction. So I would say peer pressure plays a huge role. I mean, even in school, I remember in my own school days, I had a friend, and they were smoking. And I looked at it and I was like, wow, it looks so cool. I mean, this is an indirect peer pressure. There can be direct too, where your friend just directly tells you that if you're my friend, come on, just smoke up. It's only once, come on. I'm never going to ask you again. But that one touch was enough to blow you away. Once we get into it, you might ask me now, as you all correctly said, that once in a while on New Year's or something, we do have a glass of champagne, a wine or something. Then why aren't we also getting, into addiction? Now, this is the part where I will speak on few specific things. The age of onset. For people who get exposed to addiction early on, they have higher chances, not just addiction, I mean substance, early on, the higher chances of getting into addiction because your brain is developing in that stage. And in a developing brain, when you already make a change, it kind of wants to be in that similar manner. And then throughout your life, even though you try your best, unfortunately, you're not able to get back to yourself. Eventually, you get back to drugs even though you quit it. Next, I would say one more risk factor that we commonly ignore is dual things, dual diagnosis things. For example, if you have comorbid anxiety, if you have comorbid depression, this is one common thing. A lot of people come to me and tell me that, doc, this person is drinking alcohol because he's depressed. See, it could be either of the ways. So it could be also that a person is in depression and that's why he started drinking, or it could be the other way, that because he started drinking, smoking up, anything of that sort, he got into depression. But if you are in depression, or even the other things like bipolar disorder, mania, or you have schizophrenia, in fact, that is one association that we speak very commonly in schizophrenia and smoking. That people who are in schizophrenia, they have less dopamine in the brain. So to stimulate themselves more, they try to smoke cigarettes. So similarly, when you're in a depression, you try to drink alcohol. But people, remember, before I forget to ever say this is again a myth buster. Alcohol does not solve depression. In fact, it is called as a depressogenic. So it induces depression in people, surprisingly. And lastly, two small factors that I would say is the drug of choice that you're exposed to for the first time. So heroin or cocaine or marijuana. These are substances that make you feel high too fast and want to have another experience like that too soon. Alcohol, cigarette smoking are things that are comparatively milder. But again, as I said, this is not an all or none rule. And lastly, I would say the way you use the drug too. So if you smoke or you inject, the effect is much better or much higher than the way you ingest through your mouth. So you need to understand that there are these small things that could make you want to get stuck into this phase forever. So we need to be absolutely careful in that, right? So now, Charan, now that we understand the risk factors and everything, that how is addiction happening, tell me, how do I know if I have an addiction? Now that we understand the basics.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically the core of the topic, right? A lot of people, when they say that you are dependent, the first thing is denial. They tell that I'm not dependent. I can stop anytime that I want to. I have that power. I'm just drinking. I know I'm not dependent. And my someone who is drinking alcohol tells me that my liver functions are normal, so I'm not dependent. So for people, yeah, for people to know, addiction and dependence doesn't really matter with your physical findings. It's a behavioral disorder. It's a disease of your brain. So not necessarily your liver or lung should go for a toss. Eventually they will, but that's not the criteria for me to tell that only if they're abnormal, then you don't have. So there are six criteria. There are six features that you need to look at in case of to self diagnose, right? Even that's the basic criteria even we doctors use. um, so the first simplest thing to begin with is called as craving. Obviously, why do you drink something? Because you're craving for it. Let's just say I'm going to give you an example of if I am drinking, because I'm 100% sure I'm not addicted. So let me give example the difference between me and someone who is addicted. I don't crave for alcohol. I don't just sit and be like, oh, it's raining, let me have a beer, or I want to have a drink. I don't crave. Maybe in a social situation, because I'm in a particular situation, I might have a drink or two, but I don't crave for it, right? So craving is the first thing. Second thing is called as tolerance. Tolerance means, let's just say I'm getting high on one beer, right? And I'm drinking like once in 2 months, and again 2 months later I'm getting again same high on that one beer. But for people who are drinking a little more often, what happens is this one beer doesn't do anything to them, so they will go to second beer, third beer, and then they'll go to the hard spirits, vodka, whiskey, brandy, gin, rum, etc. This is not about alcohol. Anything is a similar way. Tolerance is you keeping on having to increase the dose that you take, either to enjoy the pleasure of it or to avoid the displeasure caused by the withdrawal. What is withdrawal? That's the third feature. Withdrawal is when you suddenly stop taking the drug, you experience various physical and psychological and maybe even emotional symptoms. So that's the reason why people keep going back to it, because they don't want to feel terrible. More than feeling the high, this is what happens. That's the third thing. These are three common criteria that a lot of people have. There are other three criteria. One is obviously loss of control. Loss of control in what? In terms of initiation, dosage, and termination. For example, I'm going to go to a club. I'm going and it's my birthday party. So I have decided that I'll only drink maybe 2 pegs today, but I can control. But someone who is addicted, they cannot control. They cannot control if they're starting or not. Once they start, what is the dosage and when to stop? They can't control. There is absolutely loss of control. And fifth one is called salience. Salience is when you don't have pleasure in anything else, like I told in the beginning, other than taking this substance or drug. This is your only pleasure. Relationships, your job, nothing gives you the happiness. So you keep going back to it. And last one is very important: continuing to use the drug despite knowing its harmful consequences. For example, doctor had told you that your liver is already gone. If you drink further, you'll end up in liver failure. But you will still not be able to do anything about it, and you will go back and drink. They're the six features. So see that if you are meeting any three of these at least, call yourself a dependent or addict. But addict is not a swear word. It is a medical terminology that I'm giving you. But for people who try to fit them in two criteria and say that, oh, I'm not dependent yet, but even two can be dependent. So two or more, let's just say safe to say, but for our doctors, we need three to treat you. But if you have two, you're almost there. It's not going to take much long. Yeah, this is how you diagnose.
That was
Rahul,
so interesting.
yeah, there are a couple of questions. We'll take that and then we'll get back to our questions, okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
How much of a risk factor is genetics when you are talking about addiction? For example, when I visit the physician, they always ask my family history concerning addiction. Yeah.
So, as I already, I think, picked up on this, that genetics is a huge risk factor you need to understand that yes, there are some people you might have seen that they just have smoked once or drank once, but for them, the feeling to drink more or to smoke more is much more. So it's kind of that pathway is already ready-made sensitive. So it wants more and more immediately. So that increase in dopamine, it's basically called as a dopamine kick for people who
Yeah.
are very interested in this. And that is a spurt of dopamine that happens more easily in people who are genetically prone. So genetics plays a huge role in getting you into addiction. But remember, eventually it also boils down to you as a person. So if you at the end of the day want to be away from addiction, it's not that even if your entire family except for you is drinking, or smoking or doing some addiction, will get into addict. You will also get into addiction.
Right. I think that's answered. Um, what if a person is going through depression and she or he thinks of consuming alcohol with friends that socially will it predispose for addiction? Someone who is already having depression, I'll put it like this. Let's just say I'm having clinical depression, but I'm out with my friends and I want to have a drink. So, will the depression make me an addict for alcohol?
So we could call it more like an abuse. In fact, the reason why you're drinking or smoking or doing these substances is to make yourself feel better. So, but naturally, you're abusing yourself by taking these substances unnecessarily. So it's not an addiction yet. I mean, while you immediately drink the first glass, but there's a higher chance for you to get into a depression, to get into an addiction because of that anxiety. I mean, there are so many people who have so much anxiety and they start smoking because they feel better with that smoking. But eventually they start with one cigarette and get into 15, 20 cigarettes in a day and still their anxiety is not coming under control. And then they come to the doctor. And actually they come to the doctor to quit smoking. And then they realize that they had actually underlying anxiety. So yes, there is a chance of you to get into addiction, but the first drink or the first smoke is not going to do that. But remember that why are you doing it? This is one question that, in fact, if a lot of people ask me that, doctor, my friends and all are drinking, smoking, should I go and tell them not to? I ask them to ask their friends, why are they drinking? Ask them that. And when you get the answer, you realize what it is exactly, whether it's an addiction or an abuse or it's an occasional use.
Yeah. In
What do
fact,
you think?
yeah, no, that is true. I mean, you answered it quite well. Even I think the same. I tell all my patients, please never drink when you are sad, never drink when you're alone.
Precise.
Very precise. Like that's just very layman term for you to understand that, okay, you're already addicted to it. Because why would you want to drink alone? People say, I would like to enjoy a drink. But again, you also have to see the cultural aspects of drinking. Spanish, Italian, they're used to, I don't know about Spanish, but Italians are used to like drinking, having a drink along with their food. So it's also cultural. So you
In
have,
fact, even in Christians in the
yeah,
church, they're given a sip of wine. So they're already exposed to alcohol. For a lot of people, I would say in Hinduism, for them, even tasting alcohol is similar to like tasting non-vegetarian or something. And like, oh my God, we can't do that. But in Christians, it's already happened. So how many of them actually get into addiction again, isn't it? So this is also the factor that we need to keep in mind, I believe.
mhm. True, true. Yeah. So Rahul, how can parents help their children to avoid alcohol or any other addictions? It's not about alcohol, any addiction. How can you help your kid so he doesn't go into addictions?
So I would say that we could look into two factors over here. One is the avoidance, and the second is the prevention further. So avoidance begins at the most basic level, as I already spoke of, that parents need to become aware of how are they taking care of their children. A lot of parents come to me just for basic counseling sessions that we want to learn how to do parenting. Nowadays, it has become so common that they just randomly come in saying that there is no problem as such, but we don't know whether we are doing it in the right manner or not, and even if we should improve on that or not. So I say that, see, make certain rules and regulations, follow them, abide them very specifically. You need to understand that addiction is not about only consuming the substances, it's about discipline as well, about how well your child learns to say no and understand what are the implications of everything. I will, in fact, go to this extent that just the way how parents teach their girl children about good touch and bad touch, I think this is also something that parents need to teach their children on how to, tell someone that no, this is not something I want to try. I mean, even if your friends tell you that, a lot of friends tell them that their friends that come on, your parents are always going to say no. But you need to tell your children in detail about what it is, what this does. Maybe, there are so many online videos nowadays that, in fact, I had recently seen an animated video that was made for children that clearly explains how the substance goes inside, what does it do to the entire body, and how eventually you turn out. So this is, I think, something as important as sex education, that you need to understand that these are things that are going to directly affect your children in the future. At the same time, don't make them scared about it, so that they stop. There are some parents who become extremely strict and tell them that don't even interact with people who are, consuming these substances. Don't restrict them. Teach them what is right, what is wrong in your sense of mind, and let them eventually decide what they need to do. Now, this comes in the part where how they avoid. Let's come to the prevention part. A lot of parents think that they should give their child a little bit of space. I agree to that, but you need to define that space. You need to be aware where your child is all the time, irrespective however big your child has become. Know what is happening. A lot of parents also ask me that is it okay if we, kind of consume an alcohol or a cigarette with them, so that they will know that it's okay to do it with parents, but not to do it with external friends or something. I tell them that know this, that your child, how he is or she is. If you think that they can control themselves, then it's your desire, your wish. Eventually, unless and until whatever you want to do, you will go ahead and do it. But know what is the limit for your child. If you think that your child is impulsive, then the child is going to obviously enjoy doing it at home as well and doing it with friends as well, and then it's going to be a complete disaster. So you need to understand the psychology of your child, and nobody else can understand it better than you. And lastly, just to end it, I would say that a lot of parents come to me saying that as soon as they realize that their children are, into addiction or something, they beat the hell out of them. I say, see, beating is not the solution. It's not going to stop them from doing it. In fact, it's going to worsen it up. Rather, we are there, we mental health professionals, we are, good at this. We will exactly tell you what you really need to do and what you need to do at the right stage too. So I think this is a few pointers which I would say that if parents are listening to right now, they should kind of, apply this. What do you say, Charan? You want to add something to this?
Um, I think two things. This is out of our textbooks, right? This is just on practice, what I observed. The two risk factors for people to get into any substance use, one is 50 or 80% is peer pressure. Or if not peer pressure, it's just to form an identity. It's be the cool kid on the blog, or be part of the gang that is cool, who is partying or who is raving and things like that. Forget about substances, even not eating. If I'm a vegetarian, I'm looked down as like, oh, you're so uncool. You know what I mean?
So true. I agree.
Yeah. People have to first of all get out of this thing called cool and uncool. Also, media plays a huge role in, how the hero, is walking with a swag, with a cigarette. At a sensitive age, you also want to be that actor. Like, I saw somebody into this movie, and a certain actress was smoking in a club, and the girl next to me was telling her friend, "Oh my God, she looks so hot." So
this is so true.
Yeah. So when you are sensitizing people like that, first of all, mental health doesn't have much awareness in India. So people think that, like, I can do once in a while. Just writing smoking is injurious to health on the somewhere on the below the screen, no one is going to read that. People are going to look at the actor and actor. That's why you're paying to go to a movie, not to read what's below. So I think media will have to definitely stop these things where they're trying to show these things in a very cool light. Also, second thing is coping. A lot of people cope with any stress with substance. I work with mostly IT professionals. Most of them smoke. It's because of their work pressure. So I think we'll have to teach coping skills, life skills at much early age in the school, along with sex education. when you have a problem, how to talk it out to your friends, family, and a mental health professional, not to cope with the substance. And next thing is how my friend was telling the other day, how being uncool is so cool. Probably we should teach that.
I so agree. In fact, that brings me to your next question, Charan. Tell
Yeah.
me, how much of addiction is actually genetic? Since I
Yeah.
mean, we have both spoken on this, I want to know the exact statistics of that so that people can really know if someone is there in their family suffering
Hmm.
from addiction, how much they need to be careful about it.
Right. So you already explained in great depth about genetics. What I want to tell is people should know that genetics is not just that, oh, if your father has it, you will get it. There are diseases like that also, but most of the diseases is a combination of genetics and the environment. Let's just say that I have a father who is alcohol dependent, and all my childhood, all I have seen him do is have alcohol. So my environment is also such that I'm learning, because kids usually learn from imitating from their adults, and genes also play a role. Now, definitely, I can get into a substance dependence, but again, there's something called gene pool. Gene pool is where, let's just say, 5, 6 diseases, they come from the same gene. If my father has this particular disease, I don't have to have the same disease. I can have the disease from the gene pool as well. For example, bipolar, antisocial personality disorder, all these come into the gene pool. As Dr. Rahul said before, some psychiatric diseases, they are more prone for substance addictions. So it is genetic and also environmental, but you can't just blame it on the genes that I can't do it, I can't do anything about it. Even if it is genetic, you still can get treated, right? So yeah, it is genetic. Statistics, I'm really not sure. They keep changing every year. So
That's so true, and I think people understand this gene pool example better, so people remember this, I would say.
yeah, yeah. Rahul, probably one of the last but one question for you. If someone is going through dependence, if someone has thought that probably I'm getting addicted, there are different ways to reach help, right? The common help is obviously going to a rehabilitation center or direction center, coming to a psychiatrist. There are self-help groups. There are 12-step programs. I studied from Mangalore, Manipal, which is a mainly Catholic place. I studied from a Catholic college. So we had churches and things like that. People used to have these AA meetings, which are very good. But if someone will have to choose between a buffet of the treatment, what is the hierarchy? What do you think people should do?
So to begin answering this question, let me put a disclaimer over here. I know you might all think that since we are mental health professionals, we might end up trying to propagate more of what we do. But see, at the end of the day, yes, clinically proven things are much more effective, very honestly. So obviously, I'm going to start with first explaining what we do as a mental health professional. As soon as a person in addiction comes inside the room in the clinic to us and tells us that they are suffering from an addiction. So the first thing that we need to do is, as Charan already explained in how does a person come to know he is in addiction, they suffer from a withdrawal state. Because what happens is either they come to us when they're still consuming the substance, or they come to us when they have stopped the substance. So when they're still consuming, when we ask them to stop, they're going to go in a withdrawal state. Or when they already have stopped and come, they are already in a withdrawal state, and probably that's the reason why they have come. Probably that is also not the reason they have come. They have been referred by another physician who thought that yes, this is a withdrawal state that they should be treated for. So now this is the acute phase of the treatment where we replace this substance in the body with something else so that all those feelings of withdrawal, it can be shivering, it can be where you can't sleep, you have nausea, vomiting. In severe cases of withdrawal, you can have seizure episodes, and on the last note, you can even die because of this withdrawal state. So remember, guys, that this acute state needs to be treated immediately with good medicines that will stabilize this effect so that you don't go into a withdrawal state anymore. Now, I'll immediately compare this with some de-addiction centers or some places which have 12-step programs. So, in fact, I know quite a lot of them in Mumbai because most of my patients who come to me, they tell me all these experiences. So, this is first-hand heard from someone and not something that I'm imagining people. So what happens is that these people tell me that what their family members did was take them to these centers that are run by ex-addicts or people who suddenly want to do good in the society and open these de-addiction centers and charge very less to keep people in addiction so that they can help people thinking that they are helping people. But what they do is they just take this person and close them inside a room and tell them that in this withdrawal state for the next 10 days, you don't have to do anything. You can shout, you can scream, you can do whatever you want, but you can't leave. And in 10 days, you're going to feel better. Now, this is no way for a person to recover from addiction. This is going to be, in fact, harmful. As I already said, it could lead to seizure episodes, it could lead to a confusional state, and it could even lead to your death. So, what if that happens? I mean, even if probably you're helping five people, but four people are, suffering from it, from the harmful consequences of that, what is the use of your treatment then? This is the first comparison that I will begin with. Now, once this acute phase of treatment is done, there is this maintenance phase. And now this is where the role of these de-addiction centers play. Now, to begin with, these de-addiction centers follow the concept of Alcohol Anonymous. Now, that is a very logical and scientific thing which I also believe in, and I, in fact, kind of tell my patients to kindly go and attend these AA meetings because, unfortunately, what has happened, one more thing is that a lot of people watch these English series and TV shows, and they see these AA meetings that are so cool. There are, cookies and there are chocolates and things, and they think that this is how it's going to be. But when they go in reality to one AA meeting, one of my patients came and told me, he was a young fellow. He came and told me that, Doc, it was horrible. It was this dark, dingy room where there was this one guy who is an ex-addict and he was just sharing his experience, and I got scared of it. But people, you need to realize that this is what reality is, and this is how it's going to be. You need to understand the concept of an AA meeting, where they work towards maintaining a belief that by sharing, you can, come out of it in a better manner. So this is where the maintenance part of the de-addiction treatment works. Now, obviously, at the same time, our medications are needed too. So, as I said, a mental health professional's role is important at the same time. We give medicines that help in craving. Now, once a person is recovered from the acute withdrawal state, they start getting cravings. They start wanting to smoke, wanting to drink again, because that is the way your brain is wired, as Charan explained, that those chemical changes have happened. There are these memory centers that remind you of it again and again. When you pass by a similar lane or when you face the similar kind of stress in your life, you feel like wanting to do it again. So this is where the role of these anti-craving agents play, where it reduces this effect. It removes that neurochemical effect in the brain, the excitatory effect, and increases the inhibitory effect. So you stay stable and confident. But eventually, let me add this one line over here, that this will work only if a person can control themselves at the same time too. So as much as addiction is a disorder, it equally has quite an important role in the person's own desire as well. I mean, if they do really control, I say that will work even more effectively. So a lot of times, this is one thing that I think you and I think you also, Charan, might be looking at. If a person comes on their own, already consider that their motivation is much better as compared to if a person is brought forcefully by their friends or family for treatment. Right. And lastly, to just add on that people, you need to remember that if you're looking for de-addiction centers, that's a good thing because there are some people who don't have that strong control in them. But look for centers where there are psychiatrists and mental health professionals attached who can help you in the right manner. Because as much as an ex-addict has recovered, it does not mean that it's the exact right way. When you give your car for servicing, there is a difference when you give it in the original showroom and when you give it to a usual mechanic to make it. I mean, the mechanic will also make the car effectively, but there will be certain things, nooks and crevices left out behind, which will eventually make the car go back to its old problems. So remember, it's very important to know the right thing to do when you're in addiction. Don't just jump into something based on what your friends told you or what some other person who was in addiction told you. Right?
Yeah.
So you tell me then, Charan, that what are the key ingredients to a successful addiction recovery?
I mean, like you already said, the first thing is definitely self-motivation is probably the biggest. you have to have insight into your illness. You're supposed to understand, okay, this is the illness. This can be the end of me and my family, my profession, my personal life, everything, and it's not definitely worth it. You have to realize self-realization, and that is important. Second is most definitely family support. You cannot do it by yourself. You need. I'm sorry, I'm so stuck with someone said the car examples are just awesome. Yeah, I think so too.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
am not Rohan, I'm Rahul.
Yeah, he's
Yes.
Dr. Rahul. He's Dr. Rahul. Yeah. Now to सुना ही होगा.
Yes.
So
Now nobody will be able to forget the name.
yeah. So family support is definitely a big one here. Um, See, again, family support can work against also. There's something called as enabling, where people treat someone who is addicted as someone who has no life left in them. So they'll be like, you don't worry, you sit, I will take care of things. I'll pay your bills, or I will drive you to the doctor. No, don't make them so dependent. At the end of the day, you have to support in helping them make right choices. You're not going to make those choices for them. So in that aspect, you can't enable the patient. You're supposed to let them be independent while
In,
supporting.
in fact, just to add on before you continue, I would like to say this is one common thing that I heard in Tamil Nadu, in fact, that there would be these specific wives that we would call them enablers. What they would do is they would get the person treated for the acute withdrawal part and then take them home and they would get them back into addiction. Because for them, it would be like that if they are into alcohol or whatever, they are kind of numb and they don't interfere with their, with the wife's life. So until it reaches to that withdrawal state, they would immediately run back to the hospital, admit them for 2 to 3 days. It would be like spa treatment. You are clean and clear now, and immediately taken back. So we would call these wives as enablers. That they would constantly taunt them, remark them, tell them go and drink alcohol, and so that they do not disturb them in their usual lives.
Oh, that is scary. Also, because you spoke about that, a lot of people, especially coming from the rural or suburban areas, they are given some medication saying that if you take this, you will not drink alcohol. If it's that easy, I would have been the richest doctor in the whole wide world. There would have been like queues outside my OPD. That's not the case. So it doesn't work like that. So without knowing, without patient knowing, and without patient's motivation, if you add these medicines and give in milk or something like that, that can kill the patient. So you please don't do that. If you're not helping him, it's okay. Don't do more damage with the intention of doing good. Please come and see a medical doctor. I'm sorry, in this aspect, I'm telling you specifically allopathic doctor, a psychiatrist, not even a counselor. First, start with the psychiatrist. You don't have to come to me. Go to any good psychiatrist. Also, don't let your
Very
early
true.
bad experiences about some terrible de-addiction center ruin it for you. Because patients keep telling me, I don't want to go to the addiction center, that my last experience is horrible. I don't want to go anymore. You
I
can't
know that
generalize
is
it.
so common.
Yeah, that's very
True,
common.
true.
Yeah. Also, I think we both forgot one of the important risk factor: job. People who are like drivers, who work in the bars, who are the like managers in the clubs and things like that. They are more exposed to
Exposed.
drugs. Yeah, even bartenders, DJs. I'm sorry, I'm not generalizing everybody, but they are definitely a bigger this thing. Yeah, yeah. Rahul, one important question is probably last question. Is there an addictive personality?
Now, that is one favorite question that everyone loves to ask. And in fact, that is one thing that family members always come and say that he has a very addictive personality. Like I knew the day he was born that he's going to get into addiction. Those are the kind of statements that sometimes I even hear. So, see, basically, I think this is based on a myth. I wouldn't say exactly that there is an addictive personality because if that was so calculative, then we would exactly know where we need to pinpoint our resources and stop them so that they never get into addiction. So, no one personality type leads to addiction ever. In fact, it is certain traits that I would say that lead to people getting addicted to whether it's drugs or whether it's alcohol or whether it's other things like internet or gambling as well,
Yeah.
since we are just talking about addiction. And these and not all the traits need to be present in everybody. So just because you told me about this one, the job thing that we forgot. Let's start with that itself. I mean, there are certain very obsessive personalities who like their work to be in their perfect way. I mean, we in fact call them kind of workaholics too, because unfortunately they can't stop themselves from doing an imperfect job. So those people are more prone to get into stress, and those people are obviously more prone to, because of the stress, they don't know what to do. They get into smoking or drinking, and that's how they show it in movies as well. That people who are too intelligent and all are constantly smoking or drinking alcohol, which is unfortunately not very true. But yes, I mean, that kind of stress is eventually going to lead you down to that rabbit hole. Next things is that the personality, certain traits of impulsivity is something that is important. Now, impulsivity is where you don't think between your thoughts and your behavior. There is a small gap between it. So what happens is when a thought comes to you that you want to smoke, instantly you pick up your finger and your hand goes there. Or when you think that you want to drink, in front of you there is this glass, you know you can control it, but in the moment, instantly your hand goes there and it picks it up. So you unfortunately lose yourself to either that drinking or smoking or any other substance. Then it could be an adventurous, risk-taking personality behavior that you could look at, where there are people who love to risk, to take all those kind of steps where they know that it could be harmful, but what the heck? Life is short. That's what some people say as a motto, that it's okay. You live only once. That is also one concept that people believe and get into addiction, unfortunately. There can be a certain trait of being disconnected and cautious. This is also where you are, aloof from people. You don't connect with people, as I was already saying in the risk factors. And there again, you want to, kind of help yourself out, thinking that it's better than to be alone. And lastly, the trait of having no regulation in yourself, no discipline in yourself. So those also traits are sometimes there in people who can't control themselves in a particular manner, I would say. What do you say? You want to add something to this, Charan?
No, that is true. I think adrenaline junkies and risk takers,
Classic.
definitely. Yeah, the classic is what we see. Even we call them antisocials. Not English, it's medical. It's not a swear word. Where there is little theft and truancy, as in like skipping school, they bully people. These people are definitely more, a lot of casual sex at a much earlier age. All this definitely has like drugs associated with it. I think
Very true.
one more thing we forgot to tell is not just depression, anxiety, people with sleep problems. People with
Oh
sleep,
yeah,
they think drinking a glass of wine is better than coming and taking appointment with a doctor who might prescribe sleeping pills. Sleeping pills are not dangerous. They are absolutely not dangerous. Lack of sleep is dangerous. And also, we don't just write a sleeping pill. We will understand why you are having sleep disturbance. If there is no reason, then we might give like symptomatically sleeping pills, which is very rare case. So don't think alcohol is better than sleeping pill. In no means it is. So yeah, don't you see that? I mean, uh, Rahul, are you back? I think you're freezing a little bit.
I'm here. I'm here.
Yeah, I think Rahul, you have 4 more minutes. We'll quickly take some questions.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, yeah. How can children help their parents or father or mother if he is addicted to alcohol? Any substance?
So
Hmm.
yeah, I think this is an excellent question. In fact, I'm associated with quite a few groups, even on Instagram, where they kind of ask me on how can they help on addiction. And this is one common thing that they came across, that their loved ones are in addiction and they don't know what exactly they can do about it. I will tell you that be supportive. See, you can't fight, as I already said, just like how a parent is to their child, that's how you have to be to your parent as well. You have to be supportive towards them. Let them know that you're there for them so that they can get better. Make them realize what are the things that they're doing financially and emotionally, physically, all the problems that they're causing. And eventually, if nothing works out, then just make them exposed to a mental health professional who will immediately talk to them in a manner. So I think we have a knack of talking to people who are in addiction, who can understand our language better. And once we start with medications, they realize how much of a difference it can make. So to begin with, first consult a mental health professional. Let us understand what is the intensity or the depth of the problem, and then we can exactly tell you what are the things that you can do. Nowadays, it is so easy to consult a psychiatrist that you just have to pick up your phone and call, and they will always be ready to guide you.
Yeah.
You want to add something?
Definitely don't scapegoat the a person, because in most of the families there is an alcoholic, right? They don't involve them into the family rituals. They don't involve them into the financial decisions. They don't involve them into anything. They're like, okay, there'll be that one room. It's usually that bachelor uncle that you have, you know, or something like that. So don't do them. Involve them.
Classical.
Probably, yeah, classic. I think they are drinking because probably they are clinically depressed and there is no other support. And this is alcohol is the only, like, coping for them. So talk to them, involve them into the things, show them other aspects of the life. Maybe they will at least be motivated enough to see a doctor rather than you tying them up and just taking to a doctor. So don't label someone as an alcoholic. It's a disease. Uh, it's diagnosis. It's not a label. It's actually there's nothing called alcoholic. We call them alcohol dependent with due respect. So yeah, that's that.
Specifically, that's actually so nice. Yeah, and
All right, Rahul. Before it ends, again, I won't be able to save the live. I think there are a couple of questions which are not about today's topic. I'm sorry, guys, because the live has to end. Thank you so much, Rahul. I think this is fun.
this was really, in fact, I think a lot of people already suggested that this should be a series. So I'm going to make sure that we are going to come back.
Yeah.
Me and Charan, we are going to be your psychiatrist duo, solving your doubts and clearing concepts.
For sure. I mean, sometimes you can just do like a Q&As also without a particular topic, because people have various questions of
a lot of doubts. So
yeah,
true. So true.
Yeah. Instead of Google, we can be their Google.
Yeah, I know. Very genuinely. So people feel free to put up the list of things that you all want in the next series to me or Charan, and we will get back to you definitely. I think this is something even I enjoyed personally, and I'm very sure Charan enjoyed it too.
Yeah.
So thank you all for attending.
Strangely, we both learn from each other too, right? Initially I said like we both are psychiatrists. What do we learn from each other? I did.
but I same here. The way the language, the things that we speak, I think it matters a lot. And every psychiatrist, I think, has their own way of doing it. And I enjoyed yours very much. Oh, someone rightly said, "Thank you, Apurva. Google is truly the worst doctor."
Google is worst doctor. Yes. Thanks, Rahul. You have a good day. I'll catch up with you. Bye.
Same. Bye.